Hi, Aunt Donna. Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Brown. I am running for the Chicago Board of Education in District 4. I like to say it's Old Town to Uptown. Um, and I'm actually here with my aunt, Donna Weber, who is currently an Oakland resident. But I'm going to give a little bit of a preface into this conversation, and then I'm going to hand it over to, I guess I'll call you Donna, but my Aunt Donna.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks for being here. So I did a conversation back in March, and we posted it on May 1st with a woman named Amy, who is working with her daughter, who is a nonverbal child with special education needs in CPS. And Amy's gone through this experience very recently about advocating for her child and all children in CPS. And so my aunt and I were at a family party, and she's had experience around kids with special needs in education in Chicagoland, and said, oh my gosh, I saw Amy's video. I have so many thoughts and opinions. And I called kind of a timeout and said, I want to hear them, but can I record it? Because I think other people want to hear this too. And so thank you for being brave enough to have the recording and taking time. She made an amazing outline, so we didn't get totally off track. But with that, this is truly an open conversation. This isn't my opinions or thoughts. This is me bringing someone with incredible real life experience and thoughts to anyone watching this to help us really make the Chicago public school system better for everyone. So with that, Aunt Donna, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'd love to hear, maybe you can introduce yourself, and also, like, you were born in Chicago, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you and your educational background as well.
Okay, I'll give you a little brief history of where I'm coming from. So I am a speech language pathologist, educated at Southern Illinois University, and having my master's degree in 1976, being a member of the American Speech and Hearing Association for, I think it's like 40 years now. I have affiliations as a private practitioner with an Illinois Department of Federal Regulation license. I did do private practice, home health services provided to adults and children through not only home health services, but through different places in the South suburbs, along with then going into the school system. It's been very interesting career, because I've worked in all capacities. So I've worked for the Illinois state of Illinois at a rehab and at a hospitals and developmental disabilities. But I'm here to tell you that I have a very diverse background, and most of it is now has been in the school systems. So I want to just give a disclaimer that I've not worked in CPS, but and to go back, I grew up in Austin, and then my parents moved us out to the suburbs, and now I am on the south side and have also worked at a lot of the schools through the cooperatives and at all levels, from early childhood all the way up to the 18 to 21-year-old programs.
Yes. And you were born in what, Loretto Hospital?
Actually, Mother Cabrini Hospital.
Oh,
Mother
awesome.
Cabrini. Yeah. So being, from that area, and Columbus Park, going to Columbus Park in Austin, we always went back there till I was, I think your mom and I were twins. Being a sibling, going back to Columbus Park, I think till we were 12 or 13 years old. So we know that area well. But
yeah. I'll interject one fun story, and then I'll let you interject. And this is just to break the ice for folks listening, because my aunt is a speech pathologist. Every family party, because I did have speech impediments with my S's, my R's, my CH's, and my SH's. I got very good coaching on all my diction, pronunciation.
Oh yeah, when you were little.
And you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It was very constructive.
That's really nice to hear. I appreciate it. So I did listen. Now, moving forward, I listened to the podcast of Amy with you, and I started to find myself wanting to have a voice to tell others that have had the same experience that she has with her daughter who had Williams syndrome. And I've worked with students with Williams syndrome, so I know what she experiences, and I still continue to do therapy and evaluations, even though I'm retired. Um, it, it's interesting because the longer you're in a profession, the more experience you have, it's easier to see things that you need to address. And this is one of them because CPS staff have notoriously, in my experience, when I've talked to people, have been asked to do their job in an understaffed situation, the majority. I'm not speaking about all the schools, but usually they find themselves understaffed. And by this, I mean, if they have a classroom that's over 28 kids, students, and also have some special ed students, it's very difficult to teach to that. And if they don't have any support staff that is assigned to that classroom, or the students in that classroom that have special needs. Now, being in the public school and listening to what Amy's going through, I had wanted to bring these points forward that she didn't know this, but she has access to state of Illinois mediators or attorneys. A lot of them work for free, and a lot of them work for no or low cost, and they work pro bono. So you don't need a boatload of money to have somebody advocate for you at the legal level. On the ISB website, there's a spot that you can look for parents under parents, and it's isbe.net. There is a spot for parents. They have a lot of information under the special ed rubric there that gives all the, not rubric, the special ed tab that gives all the information. But so I wanted to get with her to let her know she does have some advocacy there, and you don't need, a couple of thousand or more. They do have access to attorneys because all the public laws from 1922 all the way down are in place that you can turn to, with the most recent being the IDEIA, and it's the Improved Act, the Individuals with Disability for Education Improved Act. And the improvement was that they used response to intervention to decide who would be eligible for special services, special education services. But that being said, there's 4 programs that are in the schools that I've worked in, and to varying degrees. And I'm going to go through them. Pull out services, and that students are pulled out for services such as speech and language, mine, or for special education for the core curriculum subjects of math, science, and reading. And there was another, as time went on, push-in services became the topic and the key thing to do, because there were too many kids being pulled out. So the special ed staff pushed in, and they either co-taught or they sat in the back of the room with these students that needed extra help. That was kind of awkward for the special ed teacher and for the students, because then they were identified to their peers as being different. And so they started to put regular ed kids in with the groupings that this other teacher who was special ed taught. And then they didn't refer to the other teacher as a special ed teacher. But I think all the kids knew. But as time went on, the language of the verbiage that was in the schools was known not to use special education, just Jimmy come here and Martha next to him come here. So those students that could not benefit from that were put in self-contained. Self-contained classrooms are exactly what they say. These students were put in a separate room with a special education teacher, and all learning was done within that classroom with the exception of music, art, and PE. And then the last was full inclusion, which is now, I think most of the schools that are moving to full inclusion, which all the students stay in the classroom all day long with support given to that teacher. Recently, I subbed last year back in the school district, which I retired. I went back subbing as a teacher and as a parapro and a special ed teacher. So in all those capacities, I learned what the newest thing is, what's going on in my school district. And there's only a handful of kids that are pulled out for math and maybe a handful for reading. I'm saying like 5, but everything else is these kids are in the classroom with their peers, with the special ed teacher walking around and assisting them. They're usually one person in a classroom with 28 kids. It gets a little difficult when they're spread across the classroom, but we just kind of assist everybody. But most of the kids need assistance are kind of grouped in one corner of the room. If I wasn't there, the teacher would have to deal with this themselves, which, as you know, my Kelly is a classroom teacher, also art teacher. She recently worked in a very well-to-do high school in the south suburbs, far south suburbs, and they did not provide her with a parapro in the classroom. And it was very difficult for her to teach art with the amount of time she needed to attend to the special ed needs of the special ed students. So even though that school had abundance of funding, they found it not in the students' best interest to provide it within that art classroom for some reason. This is what's going on in, I believe, it's CPS, a majority of the schools. They don't provide that assistance to the classroom teacher, and whether they don't want to put it in their line budget for those teachers, they feel that they are, they could do more, put more money in a different area. It serves no good to the students in that classroom, whether they're special ed or regular ed or even gifted, because putting a high needs, special needs kids, a student in a classroom, inclusion wise, which seems to be what's happening, they all suffer. Those special needs students never do get the challenges that they, or not the special needs, the gifted students don't get the challenges that they need within that classroom.
Yeah.
I don't.
Can I share? Yeah, no, that's perfect. I was actually going to share. So when we moved back from Oregon, we went to school in Addison, and it was a private school because that's how you guys grew up, and that's what my mom chose with my dad.
Yeah.
But we also could walk, so I think walkability was a factor as well, because at some
Yeah.
point we somewhat of latchkey kids. But I think at some point we had 36 kids in a
Yep.
private school. But
Yeah.
the difference was we always had a classroom lesson, and then we always had breakouts. Like there was always the come together, teach in the breakout. And I think that's what I hear you saying is it's not one or the other. It's the combination of you can have a room with 28 or 30 or 36 kids as long as you have the support to do breakouts,
Oh,
to track, to do that small group learning, whether it's because someone is moving faster or someone's moving slower in the different subjects. And so
right.
I very vividly remember I had friends who were better at math than reading. And so when we did small group breakouts, depending on the subject or the area of what we were doing, we'd be mixed and matched in different groups.
Mhm.
And that's how we were able to be successful with a classroom size of over 30 kids K through 8.
Yeah, that's the only way.
What it sounds like you're saying is you can't have classrooms even of 25 kids if you don't have breakout supports to
Right.
break and get more small group learning. Is that accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
that's totally accurate. And it does come down to funding. And And that line item for teachers, for paraprofessionals, special ed people, I know that sometimes they, technology is big and it's expensive. But, these teachers need to be supported. Classroom teachers need to be supportive with the other. Okay, my doggy needs to come in the class, in the classroom, in the room. So one of the things that I was going to emphasize is that differentiated learning is key. These it's people in the classroom to assist the general ed classroom teacher is key. She could present a big topic and then everybody could split off small groups. That's awesome. That's ideal. But it's not always the way that it works. And that's where things start to break down. Kids start to get out of hand. Then they don't want to come to class. Then they stop coming to school because it doesn't meet their needs. So attendance then starts to be a problem. And, we get funded from attendance and from the number of special ed students that we have. And so at one point in my school district, we have an abundance of low economic, and coming with that was special education students, a high number of them. So we went over the 28% that was mandated by the state of Illinois, and we were told to keep it under 28%. If it went over, they were going to take over our school. They were going to come and monitor us. So they did. So we went over because we had a number of students that we had to identify. We even had response to intervention in place. We still had an overabundance of kids that had to be identified. They were special education. So what they did to accommodate that was do full inclusion. And that thereby reducing the number of special education teachers at each level. So they had one teacher, special education teacher, go into the classrooms to service the special education needs of the students within the classroom. So for example, one teacher services third, fourth, and fifth grade, or third and fourth grade. She would go into all the third and fourth grade rooms at the times during the education of math, during math or reading, and assist at that time. Instead of having 3 special education teachers for grades 2, 3, and 4, they would have 1, or even less, they would have 2 that would be responsible for all those students within the classroom. So they wouldn't go to a separate room for core intervention or core academic instruction at their level. They would push in. So that's basically what they did. It was kind of difficult.
I have 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
In your experience, because you worked in districts, not in Chicago, not the Chicago district, but districts probably in Cook and other collar counties, did you but like you worked with the school and you had experience with Illinois, probably the Illinois Board of Education or Illinois education system, but did you have any exposure to those district leaders? Or at that point, was it because it's special education and like your area, it really went from school to state? Do you remember having any conversations with the district? Like I went to high school in District 88. Like you were probably working in districts,
218.
Yeah. Like did you work with those district leaders, those school boards, or because I'm just kind of curious to your exposure to the district leaders versus like the principal at the school?
Oh, no, you know what? I did have access. Actually, we all, being a team member of the special education resources, not only did I have access to administration at that level, which would be the special ed director, maybe their assistant, the technology coordinators, and all the special education administrators at the cooperative. that we worked with.
Mhm.
I worked very closely with the occupational therapists and physical therapists, the technology directors, and the coordinator of services at the co-op, and actually the co-op director. We had regular meetings uh, with all the speech pathologists within that cooperative. There was probably 30 or 40 of us that would meet monthly. And so we would share knowledge of what was happening within the district. And oftentimes the director of the co-op would sit in on our meetings, as would some of the special ed directors. So we did have access, a lot of access to that. And as time went on, having the experience that I had within my district, I was asked to act in cooperation with the special ed director and some of the tasks that she needed to do,
Mhm.
and forming some, when we did the screenings, when she needed to go to the co-op, we'd go to different meetings together and share those meetings. So I
Great.
had access to a lot of that.
That's
Whether,
wonderful.
yeah, if I don't know if the input that I gave was really, because everybody had input, all these people that I worked with, all the therapists that helped, we all gave input, how things could be worked better. And I think some of it was heard because we opened up sensory rooms within each individual schools. So if we had autistic students, behavior disordered students, we were able to dedicate a classroom or space within that school for sensory integration so that they could be utilized, whether with the OTs or PTs or speech coming in, like I was in the building. But if a classroom teacher found a student needed to have a time outside of the classroom to calm down, those rooms were used with the sensory materials that were purchased with funds from both the co-op and the school district.
Great.
So we got that done. And I think that was so key. That was so important.
Right. And I just want to call out, because there's a difference between like a sensory room and a quiet, a calm down room versus like an isolation
Oh, yeah.
1950s,
They don't even have those anymore.
Yeah, those are illegal in public. So I just want to call that out. Those are different, very
Yeah,
different.
these were sensory rooms with lots of cool stuff in them, swings, trampolines,
Very
balls.
positive things that even adults should probably have in the workplace.
And the social workers used them also for emotional calming. They would have posters on the wall to show where they were at emotionally and have to identify their feelings. It was really interesting. I enjoyed it. I'm glad that we had that opportunity. Now, and then again, I'm looking at CPS, specifically this one school that I just researched that this friend of mine has her son at. They don't have anything like that. They have a cluster program. This student dressed desperately. He's 10 already. And after COVID, he went downhill. But they have nothing for him. I can't, it's very heartbreaking to know that this really happens in schools that can't provide for the individual needs of students, autism versus blind, hearing impaired. They're all bunched into one classroom.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
They don't.
Well, and I'm gonna refrain from judgment, but I think that I don't know what the metrics of success is, but I imagine the bar is low on what success is at that point. And when we were talking, just for anyone listening, when we talked about this before we hit record, my comment was, one of the reasons I'm doing this, running for the board, which is a free job, is because I genuinely believe that public education is what's going to keep our city vibrant and thriving, and that every kid deserves this. But I don't necessarily have all the answers. I don't think anyone does. If we did, we would have solved it. But being in the room at the highest level of leadership to figure it out and make a transparent plan, and it might take 5 years, but being able to be held accountable for that, to my kid, to Amy's kid, to your friend's kid, is um, I I'm not going to say no. I'm going to do it because these are people's lives, and there's no greater way to serve than to say we're going to figure this out.
Right.
Um, so the second question I had for you, I'm reading a book right now about the history of CPS, and specifically, it's talking about. I'm in the chapter now where it's talking about the 70s and the 80s.
Mm.
And you, I don't mean to age you if you don't mind, but
No,
you
I'm
graduated SIU in the early 72, 76,
76.
76.
76 with my master's, so 75 with my undergrad and 76 with my master's.
Okay, where did you do your student teaching? Were you in Southern Illinois for that, or were you
Oh,
in the suburbs?
I was on the Mississippi River in a K through 12 building, and I
Okay,
had to do home visits, which most of the people did not have indoor bathrooms. And it was very interesting. It taught me a whole lot and that of different lifestyles. Most of the kids didn't finish high school. The boys went to work on the river boats because they lived on the Mississippi River. And I can't remember the name of the town, but it took me. My cooperating teacher, the other speech pathologist, picked me up, and she drove me 45 minutes to an hour from the campus at Carbondale all the way to the Mississippi River area. And she said, I'm so glad that you're here to help me because you'll have the elementary building and I'll have the high school. So that's how we split up our caseload. That was my learning experience.
did the girls stay through high school?
Oh, the girls did, but because the boys needed to get a job to help
Oh,
with family finances, these people did not have indoor plumbing
yeah,
for their bathrooms. But when I walked in the house, it was very hard for me. The homes were very tiny and not so clean. That
yeah.
they didn't have dishwashers, or so a lot of the dishes, if they didn't get done in the morning or the night before, were still there, then on the table.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
Well, the reason why, thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah,
didn't
it
realize
was kind
that
of a
you're
it was a
on there.
memory jerk.
Yeah. And there's still places in this country, especially in the Mississippi Delta, where I imagine that's still, and I've heard that that's still very much the case. So in this book that I'm reading, especially as we think about Chicago in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they started talking about Reaganomics and the shift away from public education at the federal level. And that I thought is a part of history that we uh, we don't talk about, is like 1980s federal legislation that actually moved away from, like, actively tried to get rid of the Department of Education and got rid of a lot of public funding for education. And we see this drop. Like, if you go back and look at, money allocation at the federal level, you can see the trend. Because they thought if you do like top down economics, right? If you invest in
Yeah.
privatization, if you give corporate tax breaks, that'll trickle down, right? Trickle down economics. But my question for you, because you were in schools in Illinois and you went from
Yeah.
the south to the north, and this isn't a gotcha question, I'm just curious, as you go from the late 70s through the 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
do you feel like in the suburbs, right, which are typically okay funded, do you feel like you noticed a change in the experience between like the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s? Or was it
Huge.
more like classroom education styles?
No, you know what? That's a really good question because it might be a combination of everything. When I started in the schools, the Vietnam War just ended. And coming down to the south suburbs, my first job, we had refugees from Vietnam who couldn't speak English. Um, because there was no position, wasn't a created position for English as a second language, ESL
Right. Yeah.
teachers. We didn't even have learning disability teachers. There wasn't such a thing. That it just didn't evolve. So the speech pathologist, that would be me. I taught ESL. English, the workbook was English for a Changing World. And the teachers um, explained to me that they couldn't do anything with the students in the classroom. So I needed to take them and teach them English. and try to do some language with them, the intervention, teach them language. So I became the speech pathologist who treated speech and language disorders and the ESL teacher. Um, I don't remember them having a special education teacher. And that was in 78, 79, 80. And then during the 80s, there was the push toward special education. They started to create positions in the school where there was a special ed teacher. I don't remember them being an ESL teacher. I think I don't remember how that worked, but there were programming. The programmings that you see in the schools now, there was nothing like that in the 70s. And additionally, there weren't any highly need, how do I want to say this? Highly specialized, oh, that's not the word I want to say. There weren't a lot of autistic kids, cerebral palsy kids. There weren't those
Right.
low incidence is what it's called. There weren't the low incidence of these students weren't seen in the schools. I had no one that was
Right.
a cerebral palsy. I didn't have anyone that had low cognitive function. I didn't have anybody, with Down syndrome. I didn't have anybody with autism.
Right.
And so it was kind of boring because I came from a residential facility at the state of Illinois and I worked at a hospital. And so I did home health because I love working with stroke patients. I love that kind of thing. And so over time, it changed. Late 80s, we started to see a lot of those children because of the advent of IDEA in the 1975, Public Law 94-142, and then 80, the free and appropriate public education for students. Those laws started to become utilized. People started to realize that, and school districts were given opportunities to develop programs for them. So I think because of those public laws, then No Child Left Behind, I think that was with Bush.
Mhm.
And the IDEA, and it was IDEA, was developed in the 1990, I think, and then it was improved upon in 2004 for this response intervention. Those things help the education. I'm not sure if federal funds, who advocated for them at the federal level to get that money, but because of that money and because of those laws, we find that that's how everything started to change in the schools and give people an education. They weren't like kept at home or put at a residential facility or some facilities that nobody saw them.
Right. Institutionalized. Yeah.
Yeah, you were. That was sad. Very
I mean,
sad.
yeah. This is probably commentary, but the majority of people who suffer are the working mom. Who on top of the individual, the kid who's not getting what they need, they're not able to go to a public school and get the care, then it's the parent who takes the burden, typically the mom, who
Yeah.
continues to carry that extra load. And
Yeah.
so, the more we do this, the more we're actually just helping out,
Yeah.
women to
Right.
continue to help women. So
Yeah, there weren't even paraprofessionals. There wasn't anybody in the schools really. That it was such an involved to work at the time that I did, from the 70s to just 20. Retired in 2017 and still have contact as of last year. It's so it evolved so dramatically. It was really an interesting life for me as a speech pathologist.
yeah,
It's just
I
amazing.
want to share one thing with you, and then I know you have actually I'm looking at my notes here. You have some incredible takeaways, or your call to action for me or CPS or whomever.
Yes.
But one thing I'm going to say is I have a friend who relocated to Chicago from a different city, and this is before I met her. And she has a child that would have a 504 IEP. And
Yeah.
so when she was researching the schools in CPS, because she believes in public education, they were looking at scores. And the feedback that she got from a professional, he said the higher the score, whatever these, official or unofficial, like scores of schools, she's like, the more you should be concerned, because that means they're pushing kids out. Because no one scores perfect. The higher the score of the school,
Interesting.
the better the students perform, the more you should be concerned, which means they're pushing kids out. Because if you have real diversity and you're really taking care of students, you shouldn't look that good.
Yeah, that's true. Or it could be if it's in Chicago, that could be. If it's in a suburb,
Well,
not.
it's in Chicago.
Yeah.
That was Chicago feedback.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Oh, for sure.
Look, the kids are going to have. I went to school with great kids, and I've got siblings who just weren't good readers. And I could write a dissertation, but I'm a terrible multiple choice test taker because I overthink the last two options.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you push, and this is Amy's experience, right? You can push a kid out because you want your scores to look good.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And I totally going my opinions, and I put this little thing here, my opinions.
Yes, please.
I do not, I understand the magnet school principle that was, I disagree with a lot of the magnet school because of that. They only have, the best of the best, I suppose, and they in that neighborhood or wherever that school is located, they don't include anybody else because I think they have to test into the magnet schools. So, for example, this friend of mine, I just looked it up. That is a magnet school that her son is at. So they don't provide anything for anybody else but this one classroom where they cluster everybody together. So he's getting any services. It's not doing him a bit of good. But I really believe that the optimal approach would be for every school within the CPS. It's a huge undertaking. Every neighborhood school, that they have dynamic placement for kids, whether they're SPED or not. And I was just thinking, yeah, for SPED, meaning special education students, and it should be reviewed regularly. Now, we used to do quarterly reviews based on reports. We would look at the IEPs or the individual education plan for the individual student and change them accordingly. That may have been done, but the actual physical placement of a student was rare. Meaning, if we decided the student did better in a classroom setting all day, then we would place him there. And he never moved. I mean, I think you really have to be dynamic, very dynamic, and say, no, you know what? He's not good for that. He could sit there for everything but science. And so give him a different placement, have him have a one-on-one, have him whatever other opportunity there is, and all these pull out, push in, self-contained, all those, they could all be utilized. Different models within the school have to be utilized. And that's you have to be dynamic. And it's been my experience that a lot of the schools, the teachers within the schools, and I don't mean to be derogatory, but once they start a pattern for teaching, it's very difficult to get out of that pattern. And it's very difficult for change to occur. And you have to, because learning is dynamic, and student learning is dynamic. And as a teacher and as a leadership within the school, you have to acknowledge that, accept it, and you have to agree with it and do it. It sometimes it isn't done. And it just because, there's too many kids there. Oh, we don't have that space. Oh, but you just do it. And it could be very rewarding for the teachers and the students specifically, because that's what the school's about, teaching the students to be, contributors in society to the best of their ability. So provision for dynamic services, educational curriculum and student learning have to be dynamic. You have to have adequate support personnel when you're doing full inclusion. Even when you're not doing full inclusion, you should have adequate personnel, but especially you can't put special needs students in a classroom, or lower students in a classroom, and not give them support. Those teachers are overwhelmed, and they're not going to like their job, and they're going to complain and not do their best. And that's so key to an environment for learning. And the kids know when the teacher's not happy, and then they're not happy. And so it's a downward spiral. So provision of adequate support personnel, it's money again, and it's the principal, and they have to sit down, in the business personnel have to dedicate dollars to certain line items. And if it's chairs for the library, or if it's a person be hired for that classroom, it should be the person to be hired for the classroom, and find somebody to donate chairs for the library. That's my opinion. Separate classroom instruction you still have to have self-contained. There's certain behavior disordered students and certain students that are so low cognitive function that sit in the classroom that either, number one, they aren't learning, they're disrupting the others, and it doesn't help for other students who deserve an education also. I mean, there's it's a huge spectrum. You have the gifted students sitting in a classroom with other kids that are disruptive. It just doesn't help them at all. It doesn't, they have rights too. So you have to accommodate all of them. And the way to do that is by providing for a separate setting for students that can't function within that classroom. And you identify that with personnel within the school. And then that could be flexible. It could just be because he didn't like the teacher. He had a personality conflict with what's going on. There's a dynamic in the classroom. The students, maybe they were being bullied. I mean, there's a ton of different things. So it has to be dynamic. And I said, in my fifth point, that with behavior disorders, they can benefit from separate settings. They have to learn skills to be able to be certain set of skills to have them be able to sit in a classroom with students that follow directions, that are willing to learn. A lot of the behavior disordered students don't come with those skill sets for whatever reason, and they need to be taught them in a separate setting and try them out and practice them in a regular classroom setting, so that the teacher could still teach. So separate setting sometimes for them to recognize and accept the fact that one model that you develop at the beginning of the year doesn't work all the time. That, again, dynamic is what education should be. To me, that a lot of people can't be dynamic. I've worked with a lot of teachers my whole life that aren't dynamic. And I always have the saying of, what, teaching is changing. That's what, learning is changing. The ability to change comes hand in hand with teaching, learning. It's all dynamic. But some people, it's innate for them to like the way things are. Don't change. I don't want to change this. I'm always going to stand in front of a classroom and deliver, the lesson. That sometimes does not work. And we're finding it doesn't. CPS needs to develop a model for providing services that are not only transparent, but accountable at all levels, and invest time in learning how successful districts that provide services, how are they working? What do they do? How do they implement? I really feel that perhaps the administration, and maybe they do this, maybe they don't, should interview successful schools. What makes them successful? Can we implement what they have in our school? Can we implement from school A, B, C, and D? Let's put that together and see how it works in our school. That's so key. I think sometimes people get set and their feet are in concrete and they don't move because they don't know where to go and how to do anything. So then you choose different leaders, or you just motivate them to do something different. It's not easy for people to change their direction, and being in the schools for, I think it was 36 years, I've seen I've seen them all. And a lot are motivated, some are not, some are set in their ways. They're just happy the way things are. You really have to agree that learning is dynamic. Children are dynamic. Um, Teaching is dynamic. The whole thing has changed. You have to adapt to what's happening with the students and learning, and what's going on with the society and what's changing in society. Why are these kids coming to school not knowing, not able to follow directions, or not knowing their ABCs? There's a lot that goes in behind the scenes for that. And you can't teach a student if they're not ready to learn. If they come to school hungry, they're not learning. They have to have something to eat. They have to have their needs met emotionally and physically before they can be ready to learn. And a lot of that doesn't happen. I've worked in schools that you have to nurture those students before they are ready for the next thing, and that's learning.